Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. My name is Sean Whitaker, and I am with the International Finance Corporation and the part of the World Bank Group, and I am the co-lead, along with Mark, of the Offshore Wind Development Program at the World Bank. So, yeah, very happy to be here with this distinguished panelists. We have a few representatives from our that are taking part in our offshore wind study tour. So this is a 10-day study tour that we're organizing through the Netherlands, Germany, and Denmark, with about 45 delegates from 17 countries, and certainly very pleased to have this panel here today to share their thoughts on offshore wind. I think, as I mentioned at the beginning of the during the opening remarks, to us there is no doubt that the next big wave of offshore wind is in emerging markets. So right now we're looking, offshore wind is growing in Europe, starting to grow in OECD countries, Japan, the US, but the next big wave is without a doubt in emerging markets. And I think that when we reconvene for our next study tour in 10 years' time, I believe that there is going to be offshore wind installed and in all of these emerging markets that are part of our study tour. So very pleased to have the panelists here today. Going to just quickly introduce them. So to my right is Kamran Husseinov, who is the director of the Azerbaijan Renewable Energy Agency. To his right is Mehmet Terksioglu, who is from the Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources in Turkey. And then we have Alex Budurinka, who's from the General Directorate for Energy Policy, the Ministry of Energy for Romania. And to his right, we have Kitesa Roro, who is from South Africa and the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. So welcome to the panel, gentlemen. Maybe we can just start with I'd like to ask each one of you to talk just for a couple of minutes about the role that you see for offshore wind in your respective countries and where you see offshore wind in 10 years' time. Cameron, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, Sean. Thanks for the introduction. That's my pleasure to participate in such an amazing event in such a beautiful city, Hamburg. Let me start about our offshore wind roadmap story. So it started from the offshore wind roadmap development that, with the support of World Bank, IFC, and ESMAP, the roadmap was developed and submitted to the government. So the release of roadmap was on 3rd of June 2022. And based on this assessment, it was identified that the technical potential of the offshore wind on the Caspian Basin within the territorial waters of Azerbaijan Republic counted as 157 gigawatts. And that's quite huge potential for such a small areas. And the important thing here is that the 35 gigawatts out of this potential, that's the shallow water potential, and that's the quite attractive for the potential investors and for the energy companies. So the rest 122 gigawatts, that's the rest deep water potential. So the roadmap for offshore wind has been developed where different scenarios evaluated. So it was identified the two scenarios, one with a low growth with moderate expansion of offshore wind, resulting of supply of 7% of Azerbaijan electricity market by 2040, and high growth with significant expansion of offshore wind that would contribute with the 7.2 gigawatts to the electricity market by 2040. This is the two scenarios that was identified, but I would like also to mention that we adopted the law on the usage of the renewable energy, and the ocean rules already submitted to the, for approval. However, the legislation on the offshore energy wind should be also reviewed or added or amended to the existing legislation. So that's the work that needs to be done. After the release of the offshore wind roadmap, I would say that there's quite interest from various companies, and we received and we started the negotiations with several international oil and gas companies on this particular topic, so they're interested to develop this field in Azerbaijan. We signed the MOU with the Aqua Power for cooperation on the offshore wind just in the beginning of this year. And on 3rd June 2022, Ministry signed the implementation agreement with Masdar that covers the assessment, development, and implementation of offshore wind and green hydrogen with the capacity starting from 2 gigawatts. That's another significant development in this field. And yeah, also I would like to mention that there's a possible integration of the offshore wind with the green hydrogen production. And I believe that there's something that could be done. So we have a strong interest to develop the offshore wind in the future with the focusing on the supply of this in a green energy form to the regional and EU markets. So it could be either in the form of green energy as an electricity through Azerbaijan, Georgia, Romania, through the underwater cable. And another option is the supply of energy in the form of a green hydrogen. And we're well connected in terms of the pipeline infrastructure with the European Union. So this could be possible areas of the integration, the green hydrogen production, offshore wind, blending with natural gas. So that's very interesting.
Fantastic. Yeah, so it's got a very strong role to play potentially in Azerbaijan. Mehmet, Turkey was one of the was a really early mover on offshore wind. Same question for you. What role do you see offshore wind playing in Turkey over the next 5 to 10 years?
Thank you, Sean, for introduction. First of all, I would like to tell about the Turkish potential of the offshore. According to the wind energy potential atlas of Turkey, the country has 11 gigawatt offshore wind energy potential. The World Bank has also calculated Turkey's technical potential by using Global Wind Atlas as 12 gigawatt for fixed and 57 gigawatt for floating foundation offshore wind potential. Turkey plans to the top of offshore wind energy potential by virtue of determination of eligible sites and launch of action for offshore wind energy generation. As you mentioned, the Ministry of Energy decided to launch an action in 2018 for development of 1.2 gigawatt offshore wind power development. However, this action received little interest from developers given limited site preparation as well as the combination of high price selling. Then we postponed that tender. Our main target for 5 or 10 years is increasing the renewable energy share of the total electricity sharing is our main target.
Perfect.
Thank you.
So moving kind of up into the Black Sea and over to Romania, Alex, obviously Romania has a strong onshore wind development. Offshore wind has been something that we're investigating. We've been working with you on looking at the potential. So what role do you see offshore wind playing in Romania's energy future?
Thank you, Sean. So, as many countries, Romania has embarked on a journey to decarbonize its economy and tackle climate change. So this is not something special, but We have some clear goals to phase out coal by 2030, 2031. And I think offshore could really play an important role in helping us achieving that goal. At the moment, in our National Energy and Climate Plan, we focused mainly on solar PV and onshore wind. In the current draft that we're looking on releasing next year, we're thinking of also putting some goals, some targets for offshore, and I think this is going to help drive interest from developers. As you well know from the assessments that were done by the World Bank, Romania has a significant potential for offshore wind, around 76 gigawatts in terms of the technical potential, 22 of those being for fixed and 54 for floating. And in terms of what role could it play, one is to diversify a bit its energy mix. Like you said, onshore is quite developed, but we want to take advantage of the potential in the Black Sea as well. The second one is related to the fact that most of the wind resources in Romania are concentrated in a very small region, and that might make exporting or moving that energy to the consumption centers quite difficult. So another way of harnessing that wind energy would be for the creation of green hydrogen. So another option would be just to have some off-grid green hydrogen production. So one, diversification of its energy mix, and two, green hydrogen production. So those are the two main avenues we're looking at.
Yep. Green hydrogen is certainly on everyone's mind these days when linked with offshore wind. So Kitesa, moving down to South Africa, and obviously, I remember when we generated the technical potential maps. One of the maps that surprised us the most was South Africa. The vigorous wind speeds, the really good conditions for offshore wind. So, so tell us, what role do you see offshore wind playing in the next 10 years in South Africa?
Good, thanks, Sean. With the World ESMAP report, which identified the technical potential of South Africa, which is, as you alluded, immense potential, and South Africa wants to exploit that. And there is a moderate energy demand increase in the country, and we also want to diversify our energy more from coal into more renewable energy-based power systems. Therefore, offshore offers an opportunity for that. And there's an excellent onshore wind industry at the moment, but we are really surprised to find out that we might not have enough land space, even if the country is vast. So I think it's the right time to look into offshore for South Africa. As you said, we've got excellent wind resource between 9 and 11 meters per second, and most of these resources are very close to where the load centers are in Cape Town, Durban, and Port Elizabeth. So therefore, there is a need for us to really look into what this new technology is going to bring in our future power mix. As everybody said, I think we are also seriously looking into participating in the hydrogen economy. Therefore, the country is seriously experiencing a recurrent load shedding, a power crisis, so to say. And the power is not enough, so we need more power to produce hydrogen, and maybe it's the right time, an opportune time to look into offshore, what it brings into hydrogen production for possible export market to Europe. So these are some of the highlights that why South Africa in the next 10 years, hopefully, maybe earlier than that, we might see some of these turbines in our oceans.
I understand that we were talking before about Durban has kind of run ahead and said that they want to have offshore wind sooner rather than later. Is that do you expect to see more of those kind of regional, like Cape Town and obviously Durban are two of the areas where there's strong resource? Do you expect to see more of that kind of?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think like in many other markets, I think the industry is leading. It's very interesting report that came out the past 2 weeks was that the city of Durban, eThekwini Metro, announced in the future energy mix about 300 megawatt of offshore wind in the plan. So I think the province leads, but there should be for benefit of everyone, I think the national government should lead in setting up the conducive environment policy and whatsoever required to kickstart the industry.
Excellent. So all those involved, interested in offshore wind in South Africa, get ye to Durban and get those turbines in the water. So Cameron, what another place I think that really shocked us when we generated the maps was Azerbaijan, and the wind resource in the Caspian is crazy. It's like 9-10 meters per second you've got, and very close to demand, similar as you were saying, Contessa with Durban and Cape Town. But I mean, the Caspian is kind of a unique, an inland sea. You've got great winds, close to demand, but you also have certain challenges that are unique to that market. Can you talk about some of those challenges and how you would plan to address them on logistics, et cetera, on getting equipment into the Caspian?
Yes, thanks, Sean. That's a very interesting question indeed. You're absolutely right that our territorial water on the Caspian Basin is kind of unique in terms of the wind quality and wind speed. So for centuries we were struggling with this wind because it was, too strong, and the Baku is the city of winds, as it's called.
Right.
But now we can see that there's definitely benefits from this, and I believe that there's a kind of integration from the oil and gas industry that might to be done in the future. So when we talk about the challenges, I will tell that we have a quite relatively small domestic market, energy market. It's like installed capacity of the electricity market is 7,937 megawatts, and that's the not huge, not big market. However, I would tell that we're focusing with the options of development, the offshore wind, in the context of the supply, the energy, the green energy to the regional market or to the European markets. So we're assessing the opportunities in that field. Also, it's not only applicable to us, but just generally in the industry, offshore wind, that's all about scalability. So scale, it's very important here. So I would say that the important point kind of in the development of this industry, that's the grid integration issues. Because once you decided to integrate any of the volumes into the national grid, that would be challenging. It needs some balancing and some other activities that needs to be done in a neat way. So that's another important point on this regard. Also, I believe that taking into account that the traditional onshore wind energy is already developed. We have various projects. However, there should be applied some supporting mechanisms to offshore, since the costs are not the same, and it's require quite huge investments. So that's another challenging point to my understanding. So the government or states, they need to assess whether they could support it through some incentives, some mechanisms, maybe some exclusive tariff structure. But yeah, this is the additional, I would say, the challenges of that industry.
Yeah, and certainly I remember for those of you that are interested, the Azerbaijan roadmap is available on our website under ESMAP Offshore. But I remember the analysis that they did on the capacity to take a 10 megawatt turbine blade down the Volga-Don canal system, and it's they said it was feasible. So imagine these huge blades coming down on these Volga-Max vessels. So certainly that was less of a constraint than we thought it would be. So, Mahmoud, in your case, I mean, talking about supply chain, Turkey has done a great job of building up its wind supply chain. You have blade manufacturing, TPI in Izmir. You have Siemens Gamesa plants. I guess Aero Ruzgar was the old one of the early suppliers. So as Turkey looks to offshore wind, To what extent do you want to try to build out that supply chain for offshore wind and use what you've already got and make it bigger to be able to supply, offshore wind not only for Turkey but also for the Black Sea market, for the Mediterranean? Is that something that you're exploring?
Yes, thank you, Sean. Also, we have a huge onshore potential in Turkey. We have a 11 gigawatt installed onshore capacity right now. Also, as of August 2022, there are 357 operation wind power plants which have a total installed capacity in that capacity. As it started in the Wind Europe Finance and Investment Trends industry catalog, Turkey ranked among of the top 5 countries in Europe with 1.6 billion new investment in wind energy in 2020. Turkey also was the 5th biggest equipment producer in Europe. Turkey hosts production facilities of market-leading companies. Many European and international wind energy companies have set up production facilities in Turkey, as you mentioned. Today, there are 80 wind turbine equipment producers with production facilities in Turkey, exporting into the 45 countries on 6 continents. Also, Turkey has a strong industry that produces almost all parts, such as rotor blades, towers, generator parts, balls, gears, composite components. Enercon, Nordex, Vestas, GE, Siemens Gamesa has a factory in Turkey. Also, we would like to use this situation for offshore and the other markets, because we have a good location for Mediterranean and also Europe. We would like to use that for also the offshore.
Yeah, certainly the port of Izmir
Yes.
has amazing capacities. So Alex, I mean, looking at in Romania's context, how are you looking at some of the challenges involved in developing offshore wind in the Black Sea? And I know some of the interesting areas around the Danube Delta and around some. How are you dealing? And I know around biodiversity there are some concerns. I mean, how are you looking to address those issues going forward?
Thanks, Sean, for that question. So you're completely hit the nail on the head right there. So the potential is quite high in the Black Sea, but we need to also be aware of the potential limitations, like you noted just now, the biodiversity issues, the migration birds, and the sea life. That's something we would have to take into account in the environmental assessment. So that's one of the things. Another challenge we see is the capacity building. At the moment, Romania has some experience with offshore gas in the Black Sea. That's something we can build on in order to make our life a bit easier when we're going to transition to offshore wind. However, at the end of the roadmap study that we're going to be finalizing with the World Bank next year, we want to have a better idea of the role that each institution is going to have in each stage of this process. Ideally, they should be a one-stop shop that would make things quite trivial, but we'll know more once that report is out. And also, another key item here is risk. In order to attract developers and make the cost of investments lower, I think we need to mitigate risk as much as possible. This means, for one, making sure we have some clear targets on offshore wind capacities for a long term, more than 10 years. This means having a clear idea of who's going to build the infrastructure. And this also means that we need to have some support schemes in order to help these investors early on, because at the beginning it's going to be more expensive, but costs should be lower once we have a market going. So those are some of the key challenges.
Yeah, certainly some. And then the wind speeds, obviously, around.
Yeah, they're not maybe as high as in the Caspian Sea. It's something we can work with. They have higher capacity factors as opposed to onshore wind. But yeah, it's something we're considering as well.
Okay. And maybe, Kitessa, speaking of unique conditions, I know that in South Africa, and I should say that we worked with CSIR on developing a database of sources that would feed into the Marine Spatial Plan, and CSIR did some great work to look at some of the the mapping that would be required and the data sets that are required in order to be able to figure out suitability, best areas for offshore wind in South Africa. But I mean, what are some of the unique conditions in South Africa, in the waters around South Africa that may make that market unique? You don't have typhoons or hurricanes, but you do have rather unique currents. So what are some of the things that will make that a bit of a challenge for offshore wind development?
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, our waters are deep and we experience ocean currents frequently, and that really requires some new engineering innovation. So that's really could be one of the major challenge when it comes to offshore development in South Africa. And the other one is, of course, grid availability is going to be the next big challenge. In fact, at the moment, it's not a generation shortage that we are having, it's a grid challenge, so grid unavailability. So that probably might be the next biggest challenge. Of course, we have a long-term energy plan up until 2030, but we need to have a long-term energy planning that will inform, possible future investment in when it comes to our system. That's also another requirement. And, we've got a lot of stakeholders who have got interest in the ocean. So maybe bringing all these parties into one room to start early on the discussion and come up with a consensus might also be another challenge that I see.
Yeah, and certainly consult early, consult often, I think, is the approach to take with stakeholders, and certainly with fishing communities that are impacted are very important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, look at the time. We've got. We're going to take a few questions in a bit. So, if you have any questions, we've got expert panel up here. A unique opportunity to pose some queries to them. While you're thinking of your questions and writing them down, maybe I can ask Cameron. So, recently, obviously, there's been a spike in energy prices. Azerbaijan, obviously a very important oil and gas producer. I remember when I was in Baku, I learned that in 1900, Azerbaijan produced half of the world's oil. So it's a very long story there. But obviously, those prices have increased recently. Has this changed your view on offshore wind? Has it changed the way that you see or that your government sees offshore wind's role?
Thank you, Sean, for the question. Yes, indeed, we've got a quite huge oil and gas history, and we're quite long time in the industry. However, as being an independent state, we start to supply of oil to the international markets in the 90s, late 90s, and then just 2 years ago, we start to supply the European Union with the natural gas. So we constructed the infrastructure which goes through Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey, and then supplying gas to Greece, Bulgaria, Albania, and Italy, and supplies to natural gas to Turkey as well. So taking all of these into account, and we can see that there's a crisis in the energy market that affect the price of natural gas. We had a kind of plan in order to increase the renewable in the domestic use, because we use the 92% of the natural gas for the production of electricity on the internal market. So for now, we're having the plans to increase renewable energy in order to have the free gas, so we can supply gas to the market that has a crisis now. So that's the one of the issue here. Also, I would say that there's a possible the possible integration of the oil and gas infrastructure in the renewable business. That's very important as well for the for oil producer country, because we've got for example, the pipeline infrastructure could be used for a blending of green hydrogen with the natural gas. So that could be one of the options that make the conventional projects green. Another possible areas of the integration of with the oil and gas, that's the abandoned field. So there could be reinjection of CO2 inside of this field. So that's also benefiting and contributing to the decarbonization targets. So that's the point.
Yeah. Is that, I mean, Mahmoud, obviously that's, same question to you. Has the recent change in gas prices and electricity prices, has that had an impact on your thinking on offshore wind? Maybe accelerated your plans somewhat?
Actually, thank you, Sean. We are a different situation from the Azerbaijan because we don't have any natural gas resources. So because of this, renewable energy is most important things for us because of this. Also, this is the biggest factor if we would like to increase the renewable share of the renewable energy in this puzzle.
Because you've already got, you said you have 11 gigawatts of onshore
yes.
Wind capacity. So yeah, that's quite a lot already.
Yes.
All right. And maybe Alex, I mean, is this sort of same question to you? I know that Romania built out a lot of its wind capacity and then slowed down. I think there was no new wind capacity installed in the last 5 or 6 years, and now all of a sudden there's renewed interest. And it seems that many investors are going into Romania looking for opportunities. Is that driven by this issue of gas prices or of energy independence, or what's really behind that increased interest?
I think that's one of the factors, Sean. Other ones that I can think of is that we set some clear targets for onshore wind in our National Energy and Climate Plan. So our target for 2030 is to have 5.3 gigawatts in terms of onshore wind, and I think this has definitely helped because it put in place a clear and predictable target that Romania is trying to achieve. Other ones are like the investment opportunities that we have in Romania. So in the National Resilience and Recovery Plan, there were around 460 million euros allocated for onshore wind and solar PV. And also, Romania is also thinking of introducing a CFD scheme, which in the first 2 auctions is going to be for solar PV and onshore wind, 2023 and 2025 respectively, and that's going to be totaling around 3.5 gigawatts for both of those technologies. So I think those are some of the main factors that has maybe driven the interest in onshore wind recently as opposed to in the past.
Okay, that makes sense. Maybe go out and see if we've got any questions. If anybody has, I think we got a microphone. Has anybody got any questions that they want to ask our distinguished panelists? Anyone? All right. Yes. So do we have a microphone that we can get down in the front here?
What?
All right, Alex, thank you.
We have a volume, yeah. Well, maybe I would like to know by which year do they believe would like to have the first offshore wind really under construction or operational?
That's a great question. In what year do you expect to have your first offshore wind farm producing power? No, that's a good one. Kitesa.
In South African case, although it will be a small, about 300 megawatt, I should say in the next 3 to 5 years.
That's what we like.
Absolutely. Well, in South African case, at the moment, we are in power crisis. Our power system is in deficit. We need about 10 gigawatts of power now.
Right.
So that's why the utility is looking into 100 companies to at least generate each of them 100 megawatt, which is about 10,000 megawatt. But remember, when we decommission the coal power plants, we need a substitute. So that means we need to have a long-term view And I personally see offshore playing a role in that regard. So maybe in a bigger scale, we might not see it early on, but hopefully, at least 300 to 500 megawatt in around Durban and Cape Town in the next 3 to 5 years.
Let's make it happen. Alex, how about you?
It's a tough question, and it's difficult to tell. We first need to have the right policy in place. We first need to assure developers that the risks are mitigated. Given the fact that in mature markets like the UK and Denmark, it's still taking from the initial decision up until the point that turbines underwater, like almost 10 years. I don't think we're going to be able to achieve it faster than that, so I wouldn't say it's going to happen anytime in the next 10 years, maybe before 2040.
Mahmoud.
Thank you for question. It's very difficult to answer that question, but after the 2018, we decided to de-risking on the projects for new action. So we are working with the World Bank about these subjects for roadmap. Maybe finish the roadmap first, then after we will decide the new action. So it's difficult.
We'll see. But it's interesting, I think in Turkiye's case, you're looking at potentially taking a more of a Dutch approach where you're actually doing some of the early project de-risking and actually going to the market with basically doing all the feasibility work yourself. So that may accelerate your path somewhat.
Yes.
Yes. Cameron.
Yeah, that's a challenging question, but I would tell that based on our negotiations with the companies, so we've already launched the implementation agreement with Masdar that was signed on 3rd of June. That's about the assessment, development, and implementation of integrated offshore wind and hydrogen project with the capacity of starting from 2 gigawatt. So important point here, it's not only about the launching the project, but it's more about on the initial stage, the assessment, whether these volumes could be, well, to what extent they could be integrated into the grid, if there's any of the volumes that could be integrated, then what's the potential for export of this green energy, and in which form we should export it. So on that regard, I don't think that, well, 2 years from now, there would be this assessment going on. So I don't think that the project would happen earlier than after 3 years from now. That's the one project up to now that we're negotiating. We have quite different negotiations with the other companies as well. But I would like to highlight that we're having here double work. So it's not only about the launching the project. We also need to find an offtake. And offtake related not only in the domestic market, not only in Azerbaijan. So we need to also involve some international companies on the worldwide energy market, I would tell.
Excellent. Great. That was a good question. So what, any other questions from the audience? Any searches? All right, while you are contemplating more questions, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, so we just came from the port of Rotterdam, which was really impressive, and it really makes you realize the importance of associated infrastructure in offshore wind. The development of ports, and then bringing in vessels and all the support that's needed for construction, operation, and maintenance of the wind farms. Maybe Cameron, I can start with you. I know that in the Azerbaijan roadmap that we just published, I think we were looking at two ports, Boss Shelf, and there was a second one. So how do you look at that? I mean, how do you when you are looking at developing your offshore wind potential, how much are you looking at your ports, and have you been having discussions with your port owners and the operators so that they understand what's involved in building out offshore wind?
We have a kind of similarities on that regard, even though we decided to move the port from the historical center of the city towards 70 kilometers to the south. and we're about to launch the new project with the several stages of the development. So it would be first stage of development of the port. We call it Port Alat. That's the settlement on the south part of the Baku. So there's several stages of the development of this port, and now we're on the first stage. And we're about to launch there kind of the hub in between the China and the European market. So that would be, of course, not such a huge port as Rotterdam, but certainly will be playing the role of the regional port on the Caspian Sea. Because historically, Baku was the biggest one in the Caspian Sea as well among the ports. So also there's a plans on the renewable agenda related to this port. This port has the different authorities, so they're not under the supervision of the energy ministry, that's the transport. However, they have some plans with the green hydrogen deployment in the future and using the renewable energy. Also, there's a concept of green cargo of that port as well. So you're right that there is kind of similarities. However, of course, the scale of the port, they're not the same, of course.
I mean, Rotterdam is a pretty large port, and we're actually going, we're going to be going to the port of Esbjerg in Denmark, and we'll be there on Wednesday, so that's going to be impressive as well. Maybe just to kind of close out the argument, or close out the discussion here, I can ask you each, I mean, starting with you, Katessa. Katessa, you were involved in our first study tour back in 2019. So over the past few days, we've gotten to see more of the European, offshore wind supply chain, and spoken with a lot of developers. What has been your biggest takeaway? Is there something that's really surprised you that you've learned in witnessing the industry up close? What's been your biggest surprise or biggest takeaway so far from the study tour?
So for me, really, especially this exhibition, I never knew that such many companies are already involved in the wind business. So this is eye-opener for me, to be honest. So the takeaway for me is it's happening elsewhere. It's no more an emerging markets, an established industry, and it can be realized in South Africa. Why not? I mean, it's working elsewhere, and it has to definitely work in South Africa. And another thing is the magnitude of due diligence and a prior work that is required to establish a nascent offshore wind industry. And at least I learned what it takes, what are the building blocks, and some of the things that you need to seriously consider for this, to create a conducive market to really kickstart this industry. So these are the takeaways that are going to stay with me for many, many years to come.
Excellent. Thanks. Alex, in the context of Romania, what is the biggest surprise or the biggest takeaway that you've had from witnessing the industry up close?
For me, it's like also the industry, there's loads of players involved, and also part of the workshop that we had yesterday on offshore wind, the fact that there's no one fit-all solution for each market. There's a couple of rules that you have to take into account, like the long-term projections and also the stakeholder engagement, which are quite important to do in every market, but you need to find the solution that works for each regional context, and I think that's the main takeaway for myself. So we need to, after the roadmap study is finished, that's going to lay the groundwork for our offshore wind policy, and it's going to hopefully attract the right level of developers for Romania.
Excellent. Mahmut, what's been your biggest surprise or biggest takeaway from the last few days?
Last few days also, I was surprised that all countries want to make investments in renewable energy, especially for hydrogen. They also want to improve the hydrogen technologies. That is the biggest surprise what I
I think hydrogen is surprising us all, and will continue to do so. Last question is to you, Cameron. Same one. What's been the biggest surprise, your biggest takeaway?
Well, actually, I would say that during the last couple of days, we've got quite extensive discussions on the different issues. It's good, to cover and to gather and to have such kind of discussions between the different delegations, different countries. Like when you're sitting alone, isolated in the office, and you don't have much connection, like what's going on some particular issues related to the development of the wind energy, renewable energy. But I believe that during the last couple of days, that was very useful. We heard the challenges from the different countries. We learned the experience. And I believe that there's many things that we can learn from each other. That's very important.
I couldn't have summarized it better. Thank you very much for participating in this panel, and please give our panelists a big round of applause. And that concludes this panel. You can certainly, our guests are available for questions afterwards. Please talk to them. In 15 minutes, Mark is going to be moderating a similar panel covering Latin America and Caribbean countries. So stay tuned for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.